Way back in 2012, Darby seeded out this pasture with a specialized forage mix to turn row crop land into grazing land for his cows. After 5 years of grazing, or 4.5 years of grazing now, this is what it looks like. It's pretty lush, and it's all the result of having rotational grazing happening here. There's pastured poultry which go over this area, and there's also cattle which go over this area. Their interaction with the soil surface, their interaction with the pasture, the manure they're adding to it has helped build this soil and build this pasture over time.
So the pasture we're standing in currently was a row crop field through 2011. And the beginning of 2012, I actually planted this from scratch. I worked with a seed salesman to put together a custom mix specifically for grazing, and I'm really glad I did. The mix of grasses that we selected and planted back here really play off one another. We've always got something maturing. You know, we've got our early season ryegrass coming up in April, and then we've got fescues in the middle of the summer. We've got red clover followed by white clover. There's a little bit of alfalfa out here, some orchard grass. We've always got something coming on for the cows to graze on, and that's really important. I know a lot of guys talk about just reclaiming a row crop field and just letting it go, letting the natural seed bank come in. That's fine if you want to do that. The reason we decided to spend the money on some seed back here was because we had to make this 18 acres that we're renting back from our family at almost 135 bucks an acre pay for itself, and pay for itself quickly. I didn't have time to wait for that natural seed bank to just show up and hopefully be stuff that the cows liked and found palatable that would always have something coming in season. Is it possible to do that long term? Absolutely it is. I know there are guys that have done it. But from a cash flow management standpoint, penciling things out in an Excel spreadsheet, that was really not an option for us. So we elected to spend a whopping 1,600 bucks on seed. That's right, about $90 an acre on seed to get exactly what we wanted from the get-go, to give ourselves a huge leap forward in being able to have good grasses to graze all summer, fall, spring. We've always got something coming on up here, and I think it's worth spending the money, particularly when you're forking out a lease payment and you've got to make that cash flow. This is, at the end of the day, a business. We've got to make it cash flow. We've got to make it pay us. We've got to make it pay for itself. If it's not sustainable financially, we're not going to be doing this very long, and then we're not being regenerative at all. So choose carefully. Don't overspend, but don't be afraid to spend, I guess, is my point.
So while this is a lush, permanent pasture, under rotational grazing, that's not what a lot of the Midwest is. A lot of the Midwest is made up of corn and soy, and for some farmers, that's their context, it works. And what we got right over there behind the camera is a corn and soybean field. We're gonna go take a look at that right now, and just to show you the proximity, I'm gonna turn the camera around, not pick up the tripod, and show you where it is so you have some comparison of what one system looks like and what this system looks like when you compare them. Right through this little pathway in the woods is a soybean field. It's a corn-soy rotation. I'm gonna hop this little gate. We're gonna go over to that field, take a look at it, and see what a soybean field looks like in July compared to this grassy pasture, which we have now right behind the camera. Here's a look at the adjacent pasture, and this is green, but it's not perennial and it's not always green. A lot of times a year, this soil is brown because it's barren. Annual crops are grown here. Soybeans and corn are grown on an annual rotation. That's the market. That's what a lot of farmers are growing here. And it's led to some dramatic differences in the soil. How different? Let's dig down in this soil and take a look, and then we'll dig down in that grassy pasture and take a look at what the differences are.
So here we're just kind of showing you like how easily the shovel is going to go into the ground. And keep in mind, at present, we've only had about 6/10 of an inch of rain here in, say, the last 8 or 9 days, and you can just see how easily the shovel goes in here. This pasture is really only about truly 4 years old. Yeah, it was planted 5 years ago, but it almost died completely during the drought of 2012. But you can see how frillable the soil is and how easily it breaks apart in the shovel. This is us just digging in a conventional field that's adjacent to one of our grazing pastures. And you can just see how hard the soil is, how difficult it was to get the shovel down on the ground. I'm about 165, 170 pounds, and I'm literally jumping up and down on the shovel, trying to get it into the dirt. And I could only get it in about halfway, whereas with 3 or 4 light jumps and just 1 foot in my pasture, the shovel went in as far as I could get it down. So here we're just showing the difference between my neighbor's dirt, which I borrowed from him for a couple of minutes for our experiment here. You can just see how much harder this is. And this is literally taken just a few feet away from where my pasture is. And you can just see how matter. Yeah, the organic matter in the soil really makes a huge difference. And we've got a long way to go here. Like, we've got a lot of room for improvement, but try to break his stuff apart. I mean, it'll eventually fall apart, but it's just not fillable like our stuff is. And what that means is that his dirt isn't going to hold water, and our dirt is. And that's what this is all about, is holding water so that we can grow grass and graze cattle and build soil.
If you're all into permaculture, regenerative agriculture, restoration agriculture, whatever you want to call it, you understand the negatives that go along with this type of system. There's a lot of them. One is it's an annual based system, so there's a lot of inputs constantly going into the system. Two, it's a conventional system, so it's input heavy. There's a lot of fertilizer and herbicides that goes into these applications. A lot of the seed they're using is proprietary seed. It's not seed that can be easily heirloom type seed and given from farmer to farmer. You got to buy it from a company. It's not perennial. They're all annuals in here, so you're replanting every year. That's a lot of soil disturbance. That leads to a lot of erosion. That leads to a lot of bare soils. There's not a lot of carbon sequestration happening here because bare soils don't sequester any carbon. There's no plants on top of them putting sugar into the roots. There's no trees out here, so you don't have long-term perennial crops. This system, it works in some contexts because there's a lot of subsidies out there that back it, and I get why some farmers do it. I don't want to poo-poo this system too hard because I realize there's a lot of people that make their living this way, but there's farmers like Darby who are doing things on grass right over there that are trying to show that there's an alternative way that you can do it. There's possibly a better way to do it. This isn't the only way, although this is how millions and millions and millions of acres of the land in the US are cultivated every year in farming. It's annual corn and soy. As you can see from the two different soil samples, the soil that came out of the row crop field, it's a hard clay. It doesn't want to break apart. It's visually tight. It's not loose. It's not friable. Versus the soil here in the perennial pasture, it's loose, it's friable. Some of that clay has started to change because organic matter has gone up, while conventional farming, like you just saw in the soy condition, does add organic matter to the soil. It's not doing it nearly at the rate as a perennial pasture, and also with a lot of the cultivation, that organic matter just gets burned off. So you can already start to see after 4.5 years how this soil is starting to change, because not too long ago, it was like the soil that we just saw, hard and tight, and now with all this root activity, all the biological activity that's been stimulated by the animal interactions on the property, chickens and cattle, and then all the microbial activity in the soil started to loosen up and look really nice. This just shows the power of rotational grazing. Now, is this a better way? Maybe. Some could say yes, some could say no. It comes down to your context. But again, this is just another model, a different way to do it. And this is a way that I feel, and a lot of other people probably watching this feel, is a more regenerative model. Because this pasture, once it's planted, you only have to plant it once. And like Joel Salatin says, the things that eat it, you don't have to move them. They just walk around, they eat, they fertilize it, they control the grass. All you do is manage them. So if we get down here in this grass, you'll see a lot of coverage. I mean, it's hard to find bare soil here. While not every little bit of soil is occupied by a growing plant, there's a lot of old trample that's on the ground, shielding the soil from the direct heat of the sun, is shielding it from the pounding rains when they get these big storms here in the Midwest. There's nitrogen fixers like clover growing. You have the perennial grasses growing out here. Overall, it's a pretty productive system. And as I said earlier, this has been a system that's only been here for 4.5 years, and in 4.5 years, it's really taken off a lot. It just shows you the impact of having all the animals on the land, and so far it's looking good. If we went back and looked in that row crop field, you wouldn't see this at all. You wouldn't see nearly all this soil coverage. You'd see the little baby plants all lined up in the row, and when those crops are there, they're not shading out the soil. Eventually, they'll get to full canopy, and they'll probably shade out most of the soil, but then eventually they're harvested, and that sits as bare dirt for most of the year. So in a perennial system like this, total coverage, all year round, and it only gets better over time. As more animal impact comes on here, you're adding fertility, you're adding organic matter, and some of the plants on here are just reseeding themselves.
So this is a paddock that was grazed roughly 12 to 14 days ago, and what I wanted to show you was all this regrowth coming back here. So what you just saw was that flattened out area, and it looks like the cows went in there and destroyed it. But what happens is once we get all that big, tall, heady stuff out of the way, we start seeing all this clover pop back through. Even though we're headed into the heat of summer here in central Indiana, the stuff's just really coming back through. We've got fresh regrowth on the fescue, which performs during the heat of the summer really well. We look even here, we've got ryegrass still trying to come back, which is pretty amazing. I've not experienced ryegrass coming back this late in the summer. That's kind of crazy for me. So it's interesting to see that. It's just the conditions this summer have set themselves up so that this could come back this late in the year. We start pulling this back, you can see all this carbonous material down here that's on the ground. And this is really what building soil is all about. This is just down here slowly decaying and the little soil microbes are getting fed. But this is like really fine and soft, and it was like this, really hard. And you can just tell the difference there. This is what the rotational mop grazing does. And it really starts to loosen up the soil. You can see all the organic matter down here. This holds a lot of moisture. So even when you do have dry spells, you've got this mat that's holding all the moisture in to the soil. It doesn't let it evaporate as much. Your soil begins to build, your organic matter begins to build, you're holding water, and your grass stays nice and lush green like this, even when you're heading into summer.